Welcome to the Digital Health Off the Record podcast, our second podcast in this particular case. And this is a podcast about the latest clinical technology trends, news, and definitely where we share unfiltered insights of the industry. My name is Edwin Cohen, and I'm one of the podcast hosts. I've got quite some experience in clinical trials and digital health, and I'm doing this together with my friend Farrell.
Hey, I'm Farrell, and I'm founder of OptiTrial. And in our first podcast, we focused on the time that we had at Scope in Orlando, where the warmth and the vibes of the conference itself weren't a match for the weirdly cold Florida weather, which was not the dose of vitamin D that I was expecting in January. So, what we're looking to discuss today was we're focusing on what's the perceived impact that all the newly available digital health solutions have on sites, which is always an interesting topic given that there's such an increase in site burden and so many more trials that it's difficult for them to keep up. So, Edwin, what's the key problems that you see in this area?
Yeah, I'm very pleased actually by for us sort of addressing this topic and focus on sites. Um, when I used to work in the ClinOps and used to work closely with sites, I always felt that they were underestimated and neglected. So it's a topic close to my heart, and I'm going to list a couple of them, and there are more for sure. But yeah, you mentioned scope, and sites were heavily represented there, and a lot of feedback from them was echoed through that conference. So one of the examples that I really liked is that a site explained that they were receiving one or two devices per study, for example. But if you are a large institute, that resulted in really a pile or at least two dozens of different type of tablets stored somewhere at their office to be used for those studies, which is like, yeah, I can see literally the problem there. Obviously, and this is out there for a long time, is the different type of accounts and login that they need to have for all the different systems. So not having the ability for single sign-on, yeah, definitely something that we experience, especially when you look at the average amount of systems that are generally used across clinical trials, which is I think about 20 plus. Um, I also see, and it's not per se a bad thing, but it's a challenge, is that sites are also introducing their own technology solutions nowadays. And also these are mainly for the large institutes. And I understand why they're doing this, but it's not making the environment more easy and understandable and less complex. And yeah, maybe a last additional statistic that I want to throw into and share with the audience is that um, some data coming out from the World Economic Forum shows that 7 out of the 10 clinicians and physicians have experienced a data overload. So we are gathering an enormous amount of data and we share that with them and we ask them to interpret that and do something with that. And on top of their normal practice, seeing patients, this is, I can imagine, again, a huge amount of impact on sites. This is just, I think, a tip of the iceberg. I think, Ferry, you've got your own views and thoughts and feedback on this as well. So anything you can list?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to touch on what you've just said, I think a lot of the problem isn't necessarily directly correlated to the digital solutions themselves. Trials are just getting infinitely more complex all the time, just because there's now new innovative solutions, and that always brings new possibilities. And being a science community, obviously, you want to start doing research, right? So I think part of the problem is not the solutions themselves, but the opportunities that they bring. Um, which I've read some Tufts research where they've mentioned that the amount of data points that are being captured in trials has tripled between 2012 to 2020, which even now we're 6 years on from that, it's probably even gone even higher than that again. And by contrast, obviously capturing more data, great. And like you've pointed out, that clinicians are feeling there's data overload. But there is another paper by Tufts that mentions that a third of data collected in trials is unnecessary. Nobody looks at it. It's ridiculous. So it's one of those cases of, just because you can capture something doesn't necessarily mean that you should in the first place. And then I think the other complications that come with things is, the cycles of innovation is at the shortest it ever is. And I think there's new technologies available all the time, which, it's how to find that balance between the new and innovative versus what's actually valuable to you. And then that consequence of where there's so much new technology and, the HCPs are feeling that they're overburdened, that they're spending more time doing tech support than actually spending quality time treating the patients and making sure that they're doing all right. So it's having a balance of, we need to get back to what's important, and, the HCPs should be spending more time putting patients at ease, feeling like they're treating them rather than being a call center or a help desk or having to, balance 100 different devices as they're trying to work their way through the trials. And I also think that what you touched upon about the sites having their own systems, and I think, part of that as well is from the healthcare setting, they probably have their own tech stack, which is where they're trying to figure out how to balance, from the healthcare setting to the clinical research setting, which is part of the challenge, especially if they've managed to spend a lot of time and effort to integrate some of their healthcare systems. They probably expect that from the clinical research systems, which isn't always the case. There's lots of places where there's repeated tasks need completing, there's duplicate data entry in a lot of cases, and there's no central hub for the sites to actually work their way through.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think though the way I look at this, all the problems that we listed would be topics for us to discuss in future podcasts. Actually, we can take deeper dives into this because I think we can spend hours on each individual one, if I'm honest. It doesn't make me very happy, actually, if I listen to ourselves in this case and listen to sort of the experts in the fields about all the issues that we encounter. It doesn't really make me satisfied to see the future. So does it mean with an extensive list like this, should we even continue with digital solutions and trying new innovative things? Should we stop, or are there any cases where we've got some positive effects and good outcomes?
Absolutely. I mean, it's human nature. We like to complain, right? And it's whether it's the weather or something that's happening in your life, which at the end of the day, whenever you're going through change, it's always difficult, especially where you're having to adapt, introduce new things, go through the change management side of things, where the people and process element is often more of a blocker than the technology itself. So there have been lots of positive changes. Like if you go back, I don't know what, 20 plus years when EDCs were first introduced. Before that everything was on paper, and then if sites had to do that today, they're going to have to get massive data warehouses, and ultimately somebody's going to have to transcribe that. Same with ECOA, 15 years ago, things were being used, still being used today, and now it's probably the gold standard when it comes to capturing compared to paper when you think about things. The key benefits obviously being that you have the real-time availability of the data, which consequently enables new industry movements and standards like risk-based quality management, which you can't do that if the paper is sitting somewhere else, because you need to have digital data to truly get the most out of improving your monitoring. And I think the other big difference is when it comes to the quality of the data and the integrity behind it. So making sure there's Alcoa plus principles built in from the start, and trying to avoid parking lot syndrome where patients are catching up on paperwork as they're about to go to their visit because they weren't actually doing things as and when they were meant to. And there's been some good research as well from experts on the data integrity side that says that 72% of experts have got to an agreement that digital tools have actually reduced the human error in data entry. Because, like I said, somebody has to transcribe it, but when they're copying from paper into a system, at the end of the day, that's a new area where there's a risk introduced when it comes to the data that you have captured. And as well, I think one of the other new big innovations coming through, so all of the new solutions and sensors that are coming along, the big opportunities that they bring is having the ability now to capture data from the real life patient setting, so that you can really see what the impact of the disease and the burden it brings in their day-to-day life, which ultimately is going to be the most impactful and meaningful piece to the patients, because they're having to live with the condition, and the condition beyond the trial, it has an impact on their life. And the only way you're going to really see that is if you're in a real world setting. So as an example, if you're doing a sleep study, you do it in a hospital, you're not at home, you're not in the comfort of your room, and you've got big masks, you've got all these kind of equipment looking at you, where if you're capturing sleep when they're at home in their own bed, feeling more comfortable, you get a better reflection of what reality is. So I think that's probably the best that I've seen out of the technology as well. So, Edwin, what about you? What are some of the positive game changers that you've seen from your experiences?
Yeah, I will just highlight, I think, just two. I think there are way more examples, obviously, that we are sharing here. But what's really close to my heart is e-consent, as probably yourself and many others know. But I am really happy that we are able to provide really engaging materials to patients in different ways. Animated content, we know that that type of content is much better perceived by patients. And although I would love it to be the gold standard, I realize that we are far away from that, but we do have the ability, and we will continue. I will definitely continue to strive for push and tools for that. A more sort of general thing that has been proven is that digital technologies and platforms will help the enrollment, the speed of enrollment, and allow to include more geographical and remove more geographical barriers in studies. And the numbers show that it can go up to 40 to 60% faster than traditional recruitment from sites. So, and I think this is not mentioned enough, and that the benefits for sponsors and sites has been articulated well enough. Translating that into dollar amounts is huge, 60% faster. But we are not sharing that from my perspective too often, because that's definitely one of them, and we should be doing that for the other innovations as well, to articulate the not only the financial but the other benefits for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's not enough time that celebrates successes. That does come down to that human nature of,
Yeah,
it's, you always get more endorphins when you're complaining rather than if, something is going well. If it's going well, it's not a problem. Then it just
yeah.
happens. So I think clearly that, all the burdens that we were talking about before, they're not necessarily all driven from technology itself, but probably a lot of the wraparound operational layers and burden that come with it. There's always things like with a new solution or a new thing within your study that in turn brings some training burden. And I know from some experiences that, for example, with spirometry solutions to train people, the HCPs on and investigators how to use it correctly, it even just a refresher, it can take like up to 4 hours. And if it's a new user, it can be like 6 to 8 hours on how to measure things correctly, use the tools, use the this, the that, do all the tasks associated with that, which is, massive amount of time for the sites, especially where they've got so many other things to be doing too. And I also think, coming from a human perspective, the amount of new solutions that are available is huge. But not only the new solutions for existing solutions, there's so many new suppliers available as well, which ultimately leaves the site staff probably feeling that they need to have to constantly relearn how to do their job, which, yeah, it's just unimaginable. You think you're wanted, you know how to do your job, and then new study comes in, you're feeling confident. Next thing you know, it's using a bunch of different systems that you've never come across before. You're back at square one. You have to, enough, but then you
Yeah,
have to learn all the nuances as well.
yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree. And sort of to sum up, I agree that the tech itself is not the primary reason for all the issues that we see. I sort of hate to say this, but it's complex. And because if it was simple, people would have solved it already. And what I think, and I think we are aligned on this topic as well, or my statement, it's about the people, it's about the process, but end to end. You need to look at the entire value chain from sponsor to on a global level to country level to site level. And you need to think about sort of study startup, the approval phases, the study execution up to closure. And when you think about the technology, it needs to able and accommodate all these steps in the process. And that's tricky and that's difficult. But without keeping that in mind, it's going to be even more difficult. So, with bringing in the new technology, I would definitely urge everyone to think that holistically, to take all the stakeholders into account, to understand the impact on how to use it, when to use it, how to train. As you mentioned, rightly mentioned, that training burden is enormous, um, let alone sort of the startup, but then sort of all the amendments. Yeah, that's extreme. So, but the other thing that I do want to mention is with within R&D and clinical operations, the KPIs are on first patient in. That's the biggest milestone, which is sometimes non-negotiable. That's sort of what we need to do and to hit. And we need to squeeze in all the technology and have it ready in order to support that. And everything that's on that critical path is going to be looked at carefully. And I've seen decision being made that the technology has been removed because of the first patient in is on at risk, and that's sort of, yeah, I feel ashamed about this. So we need to think about how we can squeeze the development and the go, yeah, the sort of be ready for those timelines as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I think the fun thing about those timelines is that they're only non-negotiable until there's something that can impact from the sponsor side too, whether it's, there's regulatory feedback upon design, they need to change some things, or always the most fun one is where there's a patient that's going to be available a couple of weeks ahead of the planned first patient in, and then everybody gets squeezed as well.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah. Well, we can talk about the complexity for a long time as well. We recognize it's not an easy task to get it all resolved. I do, however, would like to know if there's a way to make it better and easier. So, Pharaoh, what's your take? What's your
I mean,
advice here?
ultimately, I think it comes down to when you're doing your study design to try and add some more pragmatism along the way. So, focus on what you actually need first and foremost, because, that's critical to your study. That's not up for discussion. But when you are looking at the exploratory elements, take a look at the broader program strategy. What is your plan when it comes to that new and novel or exploratory element? Like, how long will it take, and when would it fit in? Is it something you are looking to promote to be, a secondary or primary endpoint for your phase 3? Figure out how to balance things out. Don't try and put too many exploratory elements into any single study, because that's just going to set it up for failure, because it's going to be more difficult to recruit in the first place because there's so much burden. You're passing that on to sites, and it's not going to do you well from experience. And I think the other side that I mentioned before is, where there is the latest and greatest solutions available, just because it is there doesn't mean you need to use it immediately. You should put some more time into, innovating and streamlining the workflows that are associated with that solution as well. And that can bring much bigger benefits to everybody involved, rather than just adding incrementally on top in silos. Focus on that broader case. Find what is the sequential, workflow, and then how will it work best for everybody involved. Which, going back to you, Edwin, so I want you to put yourself into the shoes of working at a site. You can choose whichever role you like to be, but what's the piece of technology that you would tell a sponsor that you don't want to touch it, or what would be the solution that's going to really, help you in your day to day? What do you think is going to be the case?
Yeah. It's. I think it's a good question. I think it's always good to put on a different hat, to look at things from a different angle. I would like to sort of ask then if and companies to account sort of journey mapping, cohesive site journey mapping, and considering when you design a study and focus on full end-to-end on the systems and system integration. So not only internally to look at how do we need to process our data, how do we need to use this data for our submission, but really looking at all the different type of users. The other thing is, and that's something you touched upon as well, about the training. Have it centralized, centralized training solutions where you can share your certifications, where you don't need to redo the same training over and over again. That's going to save so much time. And like the single sign-on, it sounds very simple. I know that technically it's not always that simple, but from an end user, yeah, definitely something to consider and consider it to be a must-have. Farrell, before we sort of close the podcast and focusing on the site burden, we need to mention the usage of AI. And I would like to understand what your thoughts are around AI or Gen AI and how that will fit and help study sites and their burden.
Yeah, and I think, anything to do with AI, it's always knowing what problem you're looking to solve in the first place. So for me, I think the biggest problem is, how can you help connect some of these flows and how to take advantage of agents as a consequence and get them to do some of that heavy lifting and reduce the admin that falls to sites. So, as an example, why does the site in 2026 need to set up a patient in 20 different systems? It should be something that is, sequenced from the system of origin, and then, at the right points in time, it gets communicated to anything that's within the study too. And the other side of it, once they are set up, why isn't there a central place where, the site can, you know, do some querying, what do they need to focus on, take more of that risk-based or proactive approach so that it kind of let the data do the work for them, show them what areas they need to focus on within the study rather than them needing to go into 5 different systems to check has the data been completed or not. And how about yourself, Edwin?
Yeah, I will keep it short and not to derail too much, but I would say the usage of Copilot or chatbots to help screen patients, not so that site staff doesn't need to go through the entire list of medical records or a 200-page protocol to see what in exclusion criteria are relevant for this particular patient. This is where I think AI can support sites enormously and reduce the time for sort of administrative burden, and that they can stick into sort of reaching out to those patients and have proper conversation. So I think this is a very short, simple use case that I think where AI can benefit from.
Great. And I think we always love to close out on such a fun case of the hype cycle speaking on AI. So that concludes this week's episode of Digital Health Off the Record. Join us next time where we're going to be jumping into, drumroll please, AI in clinical
Surprise.
trials. So let us know if you've had any success stories when it comes to AI in your studies, or even better, for the clicks and engagement, any horror stories you've had. Let us know where it's gone totally wrong, and then we can look at digest and get into things.
So let's keep the conversation going. Do you work as a CRA or work on a site and you want to share your biggest problems, or definitely want to share solutions and success stories? Please reach out and share them with us. You can comment in the comment section or drop us a direct message. Find our podcast through the different type of channels. In the next few weeks, you will hear from us again. So yeah, sign up, like us, follow us, and share it through LinkedIn. Thank you very much for listening. Our second podcast. So goodbye for now.
Bye.